He coffee pot was heavy in Master Sergeant Rachel Torr's hands as she moved quietly around the briefing room at Fort Bragg. She poured carefully, making sure not to spill a single drop on the polished table where 24 Army officers sat reviewing tactical plans. Nobody looked at her, they never did. At 51 years old, Rachel had become very good at being invisible. She wore the plain uniform of base services, her graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. The limp in her right leg was barely noticeable anymore, though it ached in the morning and after long shifts. Her hands, scarred from an explosion that had ended her military career 5 years ago, moved with practiced efficiency. "Coffee's cold," grunted Major Brennan without looking up from his papers. "I'll get you a fresh pot, sir," Rachel said quietly. She'd learned not to react. Not to the complaints, not to the dismissive tones, not to the way some of these officers talked right through her like she was a piece of furniture. It was better this way. Easier. In the corner of the room, a young lieutenant was showing off to his companions. "My unit's the best trained in the division," he was saying. "We just finished advanced combat training last month, top marks across the board." "Who was your instructor?" another officer asked. "Some guy named Patterson. He was okay, I guess, pretty basic stuff." Rachel felt a flicker of something in her chest, annoyance maybe, or sadness. She trained Patterson herself back when she ran the Advanced Combat Training Program. She taught him everything he knew, but that was a different life. She returned with fresh coffee and placed it beside Major Brennan's elbow. He didn't thank her. He never did. "All right, people, settle down," called Colonel Vance from the head of the table. "We've got a special guest this morning. General Marcus Hayes is coming to review our readiness protocols." A murmur ran through the room. General Hayes was a legend, 3 decades of service, multiple combat deployments, and a reputation for running the tightest, most effective units in the Army. He didn't suffer fools, and he didn't accept excuses. Rachel had heard the name before, but she'd never met him. 5 years ago, she might have been sitting at this table, participating in this meeting. Now, she'd be lucky if he noticed her enough to ask for sugar in his coffee. The door opened, and General Hayes walked in. He was in his late 50s, tall and lean, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd earned every bit of his authority. "As you were," he said as the officers started to stand. "This is an informal review. I want to hear about your training programs, your readiness levels, and your challenges." Rachel moved to the back of the room, staying out of the way. She'd refill cups as needed, clear away empty plates, and then disappear back to the service corridor. Just another day. General Hayes sat down at the head of the table, and Colonel Vance began the briefing. He talked about troop readiness, equipment status, and training schedules. The general listened carefully, occasionally asking pointed questions that made the officers squirm. "Your hand-to-hand combat scores," the general said, looking at a report. "They've improved significantly in the past year. What changed?" "New training protocols, sir," Major Brennan said quickly. "We implemented a more rigorous program based on real-world combat scenarios." "Who designed the program?" There was a brief hesitation. I believe it was adapted from materials we received from the Special Operations Training Division." General Hayes frowned slightly. "Adapted how?" "Well, sir, we modified it to fit our needs, made it more practical for our unit's specific mission requirements." Rachel nearly dropped the coffee pot. Those training protocols hadn't been adapted or modified. They'd been created from scratch. She'd spent 2 years developing them, working with special operations teams, testing every scenario, every technique. She'd poured her heart and soul into that program. And now someone else was taking credit for it. "I'd like to see the original materials," General Hayes said. "The ones from Special Operations." "Of course, sir. I'll have them pulled from the archives." Rachel wanted to speak up, wanted to tell them the truth. But what would she say? That the invisible woman pouring coffee had actually designed the program these officers were bragging about. They'd laugh her out of the room. The briefing continued. They discussed weapons training, tactical exercises, leadership development. With each topic, Rachel recognized her own work, programs she'd created, techniques she'd pioneered, methods she'd spent years perfecting. All of it was being presented by officers who'd never spent a day in the field developing these systems. She felt anger building in her chest, hot and unfamiliar. For 5 years, she'd accepted her new place in the world. She'd made peace with being nobody, but hearing her life's work discussed like it was someone else's achievement, that was harder to swallow. General Hayes was asking about a specific tactical training exercise when Lieutenant Brooks jumped in enthusiastically. "Oh, that one's excellent, sir. Really challenging. It simulates a hostage rescue in an urban environment with multiple hostile targets. I ran my unit through it last month." "Interesting," the general said. "I don't recall seeing that scenario in the standard training manual." "It's a new addition," Brooks said confidently. "Very innovative approach to close-quarters combat." Rachel's hands clenched around the coffee pot. That scenario wasn't new. She'd developed it 7 years ago after consulting with teams who'd run actual hostage rescues in Iraq. She'd tested it, refined it, made it one of the most effective training tools in the program. "Who designed it?" General Hayes asked. Brooks shrugged. "Not sure, sir. It's just part of the current curriculum." The general's eyes narrowed slightly, and Rachel got the feeling he knew something wasn't adding up. He was too experienced, too sharp not to notice the inconsistencies. "Tell me," General Hayes said slowly, "these training improvements, the combat protocols, the tactical scenarios, the leadership modules, when exactly did they all start appearing in your program?" Colonel Vance checked his notes. "Most of them were implemented about 5 years ago, sir. We had a major overhaul of our training systems around that time." "And who oversaw that overhaul?" There was an uncomfortable silence. Officers glanced at each other, nobody quite sure how to answer. "It was a team effort, sir," Major Brennan finally said. "Multiple instructors contributed." "I want names," the general said firmly. More silence. Rachel watched from the back of the room as the officers fumbled through their papers, looking for documentation that would answer the general's question. "There should be records," Colonel Vance said, a note of frustration in his voice. "Personnel files, training reports. I'll have my staff pull everything together." General Hayes nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't satisfied with the answer. His gaze swept the room, taking in each officer, and then it landed on Rachel. She froze. For a long moment, the general simply looked at her. His eyes traveled from her face to her scarred hands to the service uniform she wore. Then his brow furrowed, like he was trying to remember something. Rachel looked down quickly, busying herself with arranging empty cups on her tray. Her heart was pounding. She needed to get out of this room. "Excuse me," General Hayes said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "You there in the back." Rachel's stomach dropped. "Sir." "Come here, please." Every head in the room turned to look at her. Rachel set down her tray with shaking hands and walked toward the front of the room, her limp more pronounced than usual. She could feel the officer's eyes on her, wondering why the general was bothering with the coffee server. She stopped a respectful distance from the table. "Yes, sir." General Hayes studied her face for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Rachel Torres, sir." His eyes widened slightly. "Torres," he repeated. "Master Sergeant Rachel Torres." Rachel's throat went dry. "I'm not a master sergeant anymore, sir. I was medically retired 5 years ago." The room went completely silent. General Hayes stood up slowly, his expression transforming from confusion to something like shock. "Gunny Torres," he said, using the nickname she'd earned during her Marine Corps days before transferring to the Army. "The Rachel Torres who ran the Advanced Combat Training Program." Rachel couldn't speak, she just nodded. The general looked around at the assembled officers, then back at her. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice hard as steel, "do any of you know who this woman is?" Blank stares answered him. "This," General Hayes said, gesturing to Rachel, "is Master Sergeant Rachel Torres. She is personally responsible for training more than 3,000 soldiers over her 26-year career. She designed the combat protocols you're so proud of, Major Brennan. She created that hostage rescue scenario, Lieutenant Brooks. She developed the hand-to-hand combat program, the tactical leadership course, and about 70% of the training materials you use every single day." The officers stared at Rachel like they were seeing her for the first time. "And you have her serving coffee," the general finished, his voice heavy with disgust. Rachel stood frozen at the front of the briefing room, acutely aware of every eye fixed on her. The silence was suffocating. Major Brennan's mouth hung slightly open. Lieutenant Brooks had gone pale. Colonel Vance looked like he'd been struck. Sir, Rachel managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I should get back to. You'll stay right there, General Hayes said firmly, though his tone toward her was gentle. He turned to the assembled officers. Does someone want to explain to me how one of the most decorated training instructors in the Army ended up as part of the coffee service? Colonel Vance found his voice first. Sir, I wasn't aware. When I took command here 2 years ago, I was never briefed on. He stopped, realizing how weak that sounded. You weren't briefed, the general repeated slowly. Master Sergeant Torres served at this base for over a decade. She built your entire training program from the ground up, and nobody thought to mention this. General Hayes, Rachel said quietly, permission to speak, sir. He nodded. It's not their fault. When I was medically retired, I requested reassignment to a non-instructional position. I didn't want anyone to know who I was. The words felt like stones in her mouth. I asked to be transferred to services. I asked to be left alone. The general's expression softened slightly. Why would you do that? Rachel looked down at her scarred hands. How could she explain? How could she make him understand the shame, the guilt, the overwhelming sense of failure that had consumed her after the explosion? Because I couldn't do my job anymore, sir, she said finally. I couldn't demonstrate techniques. I couldn't run obstacle courses. I couldn't do half the things I'd spent my career teaching others to do. I felt like I was useless. So I asked for a position where being useless didn't matter. Useless, General Hayes repeated, and there was anger in his voice now, not at her, but for her. Master Sergeant, you've trained some of the finest soldiers in the United States Army. Your methods have saved lives in combat zones around the world. Your techniques are taught at military academies, and you think you're useless because you can't run an obstacle course. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. Sir, with respect, I can't teach what I can't do anymore. That's where you're wrong, the general gestured to the officers at the table. These men can demonstrate techniques, they can run courses, they can do all the physical things you can't do anymore. But they don't have what you have, decades of real combat experience, the ability to design training that actually prepares soldiers for what they'll face in the field, the knowledge of what works and what gets people killed. That can't be taught in a classroom, that comes from living it. He turned back to the officers. How many of you have combat experience? A few hands went up hesitantly. And how many of you have designed a training program from scratch? The hands dropped. That's what I thought. General Hayes looked at Colonel Vance. Colonel, I'm making some changes to your training division, effective immediately. Master Sergeant Torres will be reinstated as the director of your advanced combat training program. Sir, Rachel protested, I can't. You can and you will, the general said. You'll have a staff to handle the physical demonstrations. Your job will be what it should have been all along, designing, supervising, and ensuring that the soldiers who go through this program are prepared for real combat, not just checking boxes on a training form. Colonel Vance looked uncomfortable but nodded. Yes, sir, of course, sir. I'll also need a full audit of who's been taking credit for Master Sergeant Torres' work over the past 5 years, the general continued. I want documentation, I want names, and I want explanations. Major Brennan shifted in his seat. General Hayes, I don't think anyone intentionally. Didn't they? The general's voice was sharp. You stood in this room and presented her work as your own accomplishments. You accepted praise for training programs you didn't design. Whether that was intentional or not, it stops now. Rachel felt dizzy. This was happening too fast. 5 years of carefully constructed invisibility was crumbling around her, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. Sir, she said, more firmly this time, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this anymore. General Hayes stepped closer to her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Master Sergeant, I know what happened to you. I know about the explosion in Kandahar. I know you were leading a training exercise when the IED went off. I know you lost 3 soldiers that day. Rachel's breath caught. Nobody talked about that. Nobody knew the full story. I also know, the general continued, that you stayed conscious long enough to guide the rest of your unit to safety before you collapsed. I know you spent 8 months in the hospital, and I know the Army offered you a desk job at the Pentagon, which you turned down. How do you know all this? Rachel whispered. Because one of the soldiers you saved that day is my nephew, the general said quietly. Specialist David Hayes. He wrote to me from the hospital telling me about the instructor who'd saved his life. He said you were the best teacher he'd ever had. He said you taught him not just how to fight, but how to survive. Rachel remembered David, a skinny kid from Texas, always asking questions, always wanting to learn more. She'd heard he made it out okay, but she'd never followed up. After the explosion, after the investigations, after the medical retirement, she'd cut herself off from everyone and everything connected to her old life. David's a sergeant now, General Hayes said. He's training new recruits himself using the methods you taught him. He's alive and making a difference because of you. He paused. Do you still think you're useless? Rachel couldn't answer. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, running down her cheeks. Take a moment, the general said gently. Then we'll talk about what comes next. He turned back to the officers. This briefing is over. Colonel Vance, you'll meet me in your office in 30 minutes with a complete personnel file on Master Sergeant tours and documentation of all training programs implemented in the last 5 years. The rest of you are dismissed. The officers filed out quickly, some of them glancing back at Rachel with expressions ranging from shame to curiosity. Major Brennan tried to approach her, but a sharp look from the general sent him hurrying toward the door. When they were alone, General Hayes pulled out a chair. Please sit. Rachel sat, her legs suddenly weak. The general took the seat across from her. I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do, he said. But I need you to understand something. What happened in Kandahar was not your fault. 3 soldiers died under my command, Rachel said, her voice breaking. I was supposed to check that area. I was supposed to make sure it was safe. You did check it. Your entire team swept that area twice. The IED was rigged with a remote trigger. Someone was watching and waiting. The investigation cleared you of any negligence. That doesn't bring them back. No, it doesn't. The general's voice was kind but firm. But punishing yourself for the rest of your life won't bring them back either. And it dishonors their sacrifice to waste the knowledge and experience you gained from serving with them. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that had been haunting her for 5 years. How do I teach people to survive when I couldn't save my own soldiers? Because you learned from it, General Hayes said simply. I've reviewed your training materials, Master Sergeant. After Kandahar, your protocols for IED detection improved. Your tactical awareness exercises got sharper. Your survival training became more comprehensive. You took the worst experience of your life and used it to make sure other soldiers would be better prepared. He leaned forward. That's not failure. That's exactly what a good instructor does. Rachel wiped her eyes. I don't know if I can face them. The other instructors, the officers, they'll all know what happened. They'll pity me, or worse, they'll doubt me. Some will, the general admitted. But the ones worth your time will respect you, and the soldiers you train will be safer because of you. Isn't that what matters? Rachel thought about David Hayes, alive and training others. She thought about the 3,000 soldiers who'd gone through her programs over the years. She thought about the techniques she'd developed, the lives potentially saved by better training. Maybe the general was right. Maybe she did still have something to offer. If I do this, she said slowly, I do it my way. No politics, no glory. I design the training, I supervise the execution, and I make sure every soldier who goes through the program is ready for what they'll face. Nothing else matters. Agreed, General Hayes said immediately. And I want a full staff review. Anyone who's been presenting my work as their own gets reassigned. I won't work with people I can't trust. The general smiled slightly, also agreed. Anything else? Rachel took a deep breath. I want to reach out to the families of the soldiers who died in Kandahar. I owe them an explanation, a real one, not the sanitized version from the official report. That's going to be hard, the general warned. I know, but I should have done it 5 years ago. Rachel looked at her scarred hands. I've been running for too long. If I'm going to do this, I need to stop running. General Hayes stood and extended his hand. Welcome back, Master Sergeant Tours. Rachel stood and shook his hand, feeling the weight of her decision settle over her. It was terrifying, but for the first time in 5 years, she felt something else too. Purpose. Part 3, Ghosts and Reckoning. The next morning, Rachel stood outside the Advanced Combat Training Facility, staring at the building she'd once known better than her own home. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the handle of her cane, a concession to the pain in her leg that she'd finally accepted she needed. You going in, or just planning to stare at it all day? Rachel turned to find a woman in her 30s standing behind her, wearing the uniform of a staff sergeant. She had kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Staff Sergeant Maria Chen, the woman introduced herself. General Hayes assigned me as your assistant. Figured you could use someone to help navigate the politics while you focus on the actual work. I don't need a babysitter, Rachel said, more sharply than she intended. Chen smiled. Good, because I'm not one. I'm a former student of yours, actually. You trained me 8 years ago before my first deployment to Afghanistan. She paused. You probably don't remember me. I was one of about 200 recruits that cycle. Rachel studied her face, searching her memory. You broke your ankle during the rope descent exercise, insisted on finishing the course anyway. Chen's eyes widened. You do remember. I remember all my students, Rachel said quietly, especially the stubborn ones. Well, I learned from the best, Chen gestured toward the building, ready to see what they've done to your program. They walked inside together. The facility looked the same physically, the same training rooms, the same equipment storage areas, the same offices. But something felt different. The energy was wrong somehow. In the main training hall, a class was in session. Rachel stood in the observation area and watched as Lieutenant Patterson, the instructor the young officer had mentioned during the briefing, led a group of recruits through a close-quarters combat exercise. Her trained eye immediately spotted the problems. The formations were sloppy. The communication protocols were being ignored. The safety procedures she'd spent years perfecting were being rushed through or skipped entirely. How long has this been going on? Rachel asked Chen quietly. Since about 6 months after you left, Chen admitted. The new instructors didn't understand why you designed things the way you did. They thought they could streamline the process, make it more efficient, cut out what they called unnecessary steps. Rachel watched a recruit nearly take a training weapon to the face because his partner wasn't following proper spacing protocols. Those unnecessary steps are what keep people from getting hurt. I know I've tried to tell them, but, Chen shrugged. I'm just a staff sergeant, they don't listen to me. Rachel's jaw tightened. She walked down to the training floor, her cane tapping against the concrete. The sound made Lieutenant Patterson look up. Can I help you? He asked, barely disguising his irritation at the interruption. You're teaching the room-clearing technique wrong, Rachel said. Patterson's expression hardened. Excuse me, who are you? Master Sergeant Rachel Torres. I designed this program. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, quickly replaced by defensive anger. The program's been updated since your time. We've made improvements. You've made mistakes. Rachel pointed at 2 recruits who were standing too close together. Those 2 are in each other's dead zones. If hostile fire comes from the left, they'll both be hit before they can react. Spacing should be a minimum of 6 feet with overlapping fields of vision. That's inefficient, Patterson argued. It takes too long to clear a room that way. It takes even longer when you're dead, Rachel said flatly. She raised her voice to address the recruits. Everyone freeze where you are. The recruits stopped, looking confused. Patterson started to object, but Chen stepped forward with a tablet. Lieutenant Patterson, Master Sergeant Torres has been reinstated as director of this program by order of General Hayes. You'll find the paperwork here. Patterson took the tablet, his face reddening as he read. I wasn't informed. You are now, Rachel said. Everyone take a knee, we're going back to basics. For the next hour, Rachel took the class through the proper techniques step by step. She couldn't demonstrate physically, but her knowledge was evident in every instruction, every correction, every explanation of why each detail mattered. The recruits responded to her immediately. They sensed they were learning from someone who'd actually done this, who'd lived through real combat, not just read about it in a manual. Patterson watched with barely concealed resentment, but he didn't interrupt. When the class ended, Rachel dismissed the recruits and turned to Patterson. We need to talk. My office, 15 minutes. I have another class scheduled. Reschedule it. Patterson left without another word. Chen waited until he was out of earshot before speaking. That went better than I expected. He's going to fight me every step of the way, Rachel said. Probably, but you handled it well. Chen hesitated. There's something else you should know. Major Brennan has been telling people you're just here temporarily, that you're not really fit for duty and the general is just being sentimental. Rachel wasn't surprised. Let him talk, my work will speak for itself. But as the day went on, she realized the problem was bigger than one resentful lieutenant or one bitter major. The entire culture of the training program had shifted in her absence. Corners were being cut, standards were slipping, and many of the current instructors didn't even realize what they'd lost. That afternoon, Rachel sat in her office, newly reassigned to her after 5 years, and pulled up the training records. What she found made her stomach turn. Injury rates during training had increased by 40%. Time to completion for courses had been shortened, but post-deployment performance reviews showed that soldiers weren't as well prepared as they should be. Several after-action reports from combat zones mentioned gaps in training that matched exactly the streamlined sections of the program. Someone knocked on her door. Rachel looked up to find a young captain she didn't recognize. "Master Sergeant Torres, I'm Captain Elizabeth Warren. I teach the tactical leadership course." "Come in," Rachel said. Warren entered and closed the door behind her. She looked nervous. "I wanted to apologize. I've been using your training materials for the past year, and I had no idea they were yours. I thought they were just standard Army curriculum, if I'd known." "It's fine," Rachel interrupted. "Did you modify them at all?" "No, ma'am. I actually pushed back when other instructors wanted to shorten the course. Your materials are the most comprehensive I've ever seen. I couldn't figure out what to cut without losing something important." Rachel felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Thank you for that." "I heard what happened," Warren continued. "About Kandahar, about the explosion." She paused. "My brother was on a patrol in Helmand Province 2 years ago. They encountered an IED. But their team leader had gone through your training program, the updated version after Kandahar. The detection protocols you developed saved their lives. All of them came home." Rachel felt her throat tighten. "I'm glad. I just wanted you to know that your work matters. Whatever happened, whatever you lost, it wasn't for nothing." After Warren left, Rachel sat alone in her office for a long time. She thought about the 3 soldiers who'd died under her command. She thought about all the soldiers who'd survived because of the lessons learned from that tragedy. The weight wasn't lighter, but maybe it was more bearable when she could see that it had meaning. Her phone rang. It was General Hayes. "How's your first day going?" he asked. "It's complicated," Rachel admitted. "I heard you took over Patterson's class, ruffled some feathers." "Good, maybe they'll start paying attention." The general chuckled. "I also heard Major Brennan is spreading rumors that you won't last a month." "Let him." "That's the spirit." The general's tone became more serious. "Rachel, I wanted to give you a heads up. I've been making calls about the families from Kandahar. 2 of them are willing to meet with you. The third, Specialist Morrison's father, he's still very angry." Rachel's hand tightened on the phone. James Morrison, 22 years old, engaged to be married. He died instantly in the explosion, and his father had written her a letter, the only one she'd received from the families. It had been full of rage and grief, blaming her for taking his son. "I understand," Rachel said quietly. "Do you want me to set up the meetings with the other 2 families?" Rachel took a deep breath. "Yes, all 3 if possible, even Morrison's father. He deserves to hear the truth from me whether he wants to or not." "You're sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." That evening, Rachel returned to her small apartment exhausted. But for the first time in 5 years, it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from doing work that mattered. She pulled out a box she'd kept hidden in her closet for years. Inside were photos from her military career, medals she'd never displayed, letters from former students. At the bottom was a folder she'd never had the courage to open. The official report from Kandahar. Rachel opened it now, forcing herself to read every word. The technical analysis of the IED, the timeline of events, the witness statements from survivors. And there, in the conclusion, the words she'd never let herself believe. Master Sergeant Torres acted with exceptional courage and professionalism. Her actions following the explosion directly resulted in the survival of 12 soldiers who would otherwise have perished. No evidence of negligence or tactical error was found. Rachel read it 3 times, then she pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. "Dear Mr. Morrison, my name is Rachel Torres. 5 years ago, I was the commanding officer when your son James died in Kandahar. I know you blame me for his death, and I want you to know that I've blamed myself too every single day since it happened. But I also need to tell you the truth. She wrote late into the night, putting into words everything she'd never said. The reality of what happened, the impossible choices, the split-second decisions that meant life or death. She wrote about James, his dedication, his courage, his promise as a soldier. And she wrote about the 12 soldiers who survived because of the training she'd given them, the protocols developed from hard lessons learned. She didn't know if Mr. Morrison would ever read it, but she needed to write it anyway. Tomorrow, she would continue rebuilding the training program. She would face the resentment and the doubts. She would prove that she still had something to offer. But tonight, she was finally facing her ghosts. And for the first time in 5 years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could live with them. 3 weeks into Rachel's return to the training program, things were changing. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. She'd reorganized the entire curriculum, bringing back the safety protocols and tactical principles that had been stripped away. Some instructors embraced the changes. Others, like Lieutenant Patterson, fought her at every turn. Major Brennan had filed a formal complaint, claiming Rachel was disrupting efficient operations and living in the past. Colonel Vance had dismissed it after General Hayes personally reviewed the training outcomes, data showing that injury rates had already begun to drop. But the real test came on a Thursday morning, when Rachel received a call that changed everything. "Master Sergeant Tors," said the voice on the phone, "this is Diane Morrison, James Morrison's mother." Rachel's hand froze on the phone. "Mrs. Morrison, I sent you a letter." "I know, my husband burned it without reading it." There was a pause. "But I read it first. I want to meet with you." They agreed to meet at a coffee shop off base. Rachel arrived 20 minutes early, her stomach churning with anxiety. She'd prepared for this meeting 100 times in her mind, but now that it was actually happening, she felt completely unprepared. Diane Morrison arrived exactly on time. She was in her 50s, with gray-streaked brown hair and her son's eyes. She sat down across from Rachel without saying anything at first, just studying her face. "You have scars," Diane finally said. Rachel touched her cheek self-consciously. "From the explosion. The same explosion that killed my son." "Yes, ma'am." Diane was quiet for a long moment. "My husband has been angry for 5 years. He needed someone to blame, and you were the easiest target, but I've read the reports. I've talked to the other soldiers who were there. I know what really happened." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm so sorry. If I could go back." "You do the same thing," Diane interrupted. "Because it was the right call. The IED was hidden, remote triggered. There was no way to know." "That doesn't make it hurt less." "No, it doesn't." Diane reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It showed James in his uniform, smiling at the camera. "But I didn't come here for an apology. I came to tell you something." She slid the photo across the table. Rachel picked it up with shaking hands. "James wrote home every week," Diane said. "In his last letter 3 days before the explosion, he wrote about you. He said you were the best instructor he'd ever had. He said you taught him that being a good soldier wasn't just about following orders. It was about taking care of the people who depend on you." Rachel couldn't speak. "He also wrote that you'd been acting different that week. More careful, more thorough. He said you'd made them run through IED detection procedures 4 times, even though everyone complained it was overkill." Diane's voice cracked. "Whatever you saw, whatever instinct made you drill those procedures. It saved 12 lives that day. My son died, but 12 other mothers got their children back because you prepared them." "I should have saved them all," Rachel whispered. "You're not God," Diane said gently. "You're a soldier who did everything she could, and then you spent 5 years punishing yourself for not being able to do the impossible." She leaned forward. "My son believed in you. I think it's time you started believing in yourself." They talked for another hour. Diane told stories about James, his childhood, his decision to join the army, his dreams for the future. Rachel shared memories of training him, of his determination and his humor. When they parted, Diane hugged her. "Thank you for giving me back my son's last months, for teaching him, for caring about him, for making sure his death meant something." Rachel drove back to base with tears streaming down her face. But they weren't just tears of grief anymore. They were something else too, Release, maybe, or the beginning of forgiveness. When she arrived at the training facility, she found Staff Sergeant Chen waiting with urgent news. "We have a situation," Chen said. "Remember that streamlined urban combat exercise Lieutenant Patterson has been running?" Rachel's stomach sank. What happened? Two recruits were injured, non-life-threatening, but serious enough that they're in the hospital. Patterson was cutting corners on safety protocols again. Rachel found Patterson in his office, looking shaken. When he saw her, he stood up defensively. "It was an accident," he said. "These things happen in training." "These things happen when you ignore safety protocols," Rachel said coldly. "Protocols that exist because people like me learned hard lessons about what happens when you cut corners. I was trying to make the training more realistic, more intense." "You were trying to look impressive," Rachel interrupted. "You wanted fast results and good numbers to put in your performance review, and 2 soldiers are in the hospital because of it." Patterson's face reddened. "You can't prove." "I can and I will." Rachel dropped a folder on his desk. "Those are the original training protocols, the ones you've been ignoring. They include detailed explanations of why each safety measure exists. I wrote most of them after watching good soldiers get hurt or killed because someone decided the rules didn't apply to them." She opened the folder to a specific page. "This section about maintaining proper spacing during urban combat exercises. I wrote that after a training accident in 2009, where a soldier lost an eye because his partner was standing too close, and a ricocheting training round hit him." She flipped to another page. "This section about mandatory equipment checks. I wrote that after a soldier fell from a rope course because someone skipped the harness inspection." Patterson was pale now. "Every rule in this program exists because someone got hurt when it didn't exist," Rachel continued. "And you've been treating it like bureaucratic nonsense that you're too smart to follow. Well, now 2 more soldiers are hurt, and you're going to explain to General Hayes exactly why you thought you knew better." "Master Sergeant, you're suspended from teaching duties pending investigation," Rachel said. "Colonel Vance will notify you of the formal hearing." After Patterson left, Chen appeared in the doorway. That was intense. "It needed to be." Rachel sat down heavily. "How are the injured soldiers?" "One has a concussion. The other has a broken collarbone. Both will recover, but they're out of training for at least 6 weeks." Rachel closed her eyes. "Get me their names. I want to visit them in the hospital." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." That evening, Rachel visited both soldiers. She apologized, explained what had gone wrong, and promised them it wouldn't happen again. They were both young, scared, and in pain, but they listened. "Ma'am," one of them said, "are you the Tors, the one who designed all the training programs?" Rachel nodded. "My drill sergeant talked about you, said you were a legend." The young soldier paused. "Said you got blown up saving your unit and still managed to call in the evac while you were bleeding out." Rachel had forgotten that detail. The minutes after the explosion were mostly a blur of pain and smoke. But yes, she'd radioed for help. She'd given coordinates. She'd stayed conscious long enough to make sure the survivors would be found. "Your drill sergeant exaggerated," Rachel said. "I don't think so, ma'am." As Rachel left the hospital, her phone rang. It was General Hayes. "I heard about the incident," he said. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better, sir." "I also heard how you handled it. Patterson's been reassigned. He'll face a formal review board." The general paused. "You did good work today, Rachel, not just with Patterson, but with the soldiers. They needed to see that someone cares about their safety more than the numbers on a report. Someone should have been doing that all along. You're right, and you're doing it now." After the call ended, Rachel stood in the parking lot, looking up at the stars. She thought about James Morrison, about the 12 survivors, about the 2 soldiers in the hospital, about all the soldiers who would go through her program in the future. She thought about the weight she'd been carrying for 5 years and realized something had shifted. The weight was still there, it would always be there. But she was carrying it differently now, not as punishment but as responsibility. Her phone buzzed with a text from Staff Sergeant Chen. "Tomorrow 800 full staff meeting. Time to rebuild this thing properly. You ready?" Rachel smiled and typed back, "Ready." The next morning, she stood in front of 30 instructors and support staff, many of whom had been skeptical of her return. She'd prepared a presentation showing the data, injury rates, training outcomes, post-deployment performance reviews. The numbers told a clear story. The program had declined in her absence, and it needed to be fixed. But as she looked out at the faces watching her, Rachel set aside her notes. "I'm not here to tell you that I'm perfect," she said instead. "I've made mistakes. I've lost soldiers. I've questioned every decision I've ever made. But I've also learned from those mistakes, and I've spent my career trying to make sure other people don't have to learn the same lessons the hard way." She gestured to the screen behind her, which showed photos of soldiers who'd gone through her training program over the years. "These people trusted us to prepare them. When they deploy, when they face real danger, they rely on what we taught them. That's not a job to be taken lightly or rushed through for the sake of efficiency." Rachel made eye contact with each person in the room. "I'm asking you to commit to doing this right. It's going to be harder. It's going to take longer. Some of you will disagree with my methods, but I promise you this: every soldier who completes this program will be better prepared, safer, and more likely to come home alive. And that's what matters." There was a moment of silence. Then Captain Warren started clapping. Others joined in until most of the room was applauding. Not everyone clapped. A few instructors sat with arms crossed, faces skeptical. But that was okay. Rachel wasn't here to win a popularity contest. She was here to train soldiers. Over the following months, the program transformed. Rachel implemented new modules based on recent combat experiences. She brought in veterans to share real-world lessons. She worked with Staff Sergeant Chen to develop a mentoring system where experienced instructors guided newer ones. The injury rates dropped to the lowest levels in the facility's history. Training completion times increased slightly, but post-deployment performance reviews showed soldiers were significantly better prepared. General Hayes visited regularly, always finding something to praise and something to challenge Rachel to improve. Their professional relationship had grown into genuine mutual respect. 6 months after her reinstatement, Rachel received a letter. The return address made her hands shake. "Dear Master Sergeant Tors, my name is Robert Morrison. You knew my son, James. For 5 years, I blamed you for his death. I wrote you an angry letter that you never responded to. I burned the letter you sent my wife without reading it. But last month, I attended a ceremony where 12 soldiers, the ones who survived that day in Kandahar, dedicated a memorial to the 3 men who died. They spoke about that mission, about the explosion, about you. They told me how you drilled them on IED detection just days before, how you'd insisted on extra safety protocols, how you'd stayed conscious after the blast long enough to save their lives. They told me my son died, serving with honor under a commander who cared about every soldier under her command. I can't give you forgiveness. I'm not sure I have that to give, but I want you to know that I understand now, and I'm sorry for the anger I directed at you. My son believed in you. Maybe that's enough. Robert Morrison." Rachel read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she carefully folded it and placed it in a frame on her desk, next to the photo Diane Morrison had given her. That afternoon, she taught a class on tactical decision-making. She told the recruits about Kandahar, not just the explosion, but the decisions that led up to it, the lessons learned from it, the soldiers who survived because of those lessons. "Combat is chaos," she told them. "You'll make decisions with incomplete information. You'll face impossible choices. And sometimes, despite everything you do right, people will die." She paused, making eye contact with each recruit. "But that doesn't mean you stop trying. It doesn't mean you stop learning. It means you honor the fallen by making sure their sacrifice teaches you something that might save the next soldier's life." A young recruit raised her hand. "Master Sergeant, how do you live with it, the weight of those decisions?" Rachel thought about the question. About 5 years of hiding, of self-punishment, of trying to make herself invisible. "You carry it," she said finally. "But you don't carry it alone. You share it with the people who understand. You turn it into something meaningful. And you keep moving forward because that's what the fallen would want you to do." After class, Staff Sergeant Chen approached her. "General Hayes called. He wants to see you in his office." Rachel walked across the base, wondering what this was about. When she entered the general's office, she found him standing with another officer, a colonel she didn't recognize. "Master Sergeant Tors," General Hayes said, "I'd like you to meet Colonel Sandra Williams. She runs the Special Operations Training Program at Fort Benning. Rachel shook the colonel's hand. "I've been reviewing your work here," Colonel Williams said. "The results are impressive. I'd like you to consult on our advanced training curriculum. We need someone with your expertise to help us update our programs." That's a big responsibility," Rachel said. "You've proven you can handle it," Colonel Williams smiled. "Besides, General Hayes speaks very highly of you, and the soldiers you've trained speak even more highly." Rachel looked at General Hayes, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd be honored," Rachel said. As she left the building that evening, she passed the advanced combat training facility where she'd spent most of her adult life. The sign outside now read, "Tours Advanced Combat Training Center." She hadn't asked for her name to be on the building. General Hayes had arranged it as a surprise. Rachel stood there for a long moment, thinking about the journey that had brought her back here. From the explosion in Kandahar to serving coffee in a briefing room to standing here now, rebuilding the program she'd created. Her phone buzzed with a message from David Hayes, the general's nephew. "Heard about the consulting gig. Told you that you still had it in you. Proud to have served under your command, Master Sergeant." Rachel smiled and typed back, "Proud to have trained you, Sergeant Hayes." She looked up at the building, at her name on the sign, and felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Pride. Not the arrogant pride of someone who needed recognition, but the quiet pride of someone who'd faced her demons, confronted her past, and found a way to keep serving. The scars on her hands and face would never fade. The pain in her leg would never fully heal. The memories of Kandahar would never leave her. But she wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was Master Sergeant Rachel Tours, and she had work to do. As she walked toward her car, a group of recruits passed by, heading to evening training. One of them recognized her and called out, "Evening, Master Sergeant." "Evening," Rachel called back. "Stay sharp out there." "Always, ma'am, you taught us well." Rachel drove home that night with the windows down, feeling the cool evening air on her face. Tomorrow, she'd start working on the Special Operations curriculum. She'd continue rebuilding her program. She'd train more soldiers, save more lives, honor the memories of those she'd lost. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of peace. She'd been invisible for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen, really seen, for who she was and what she could do. She'd served coffee in that briefing room, anonymous and forgotten, until a general recognized her call sign and reminded her of who she used to be. No, not who she used to be. Who she still was. And who she would always be. A teacher, a leader, a soldier. Master Sergeant Rachel Tours, call sign Gunny, was back where she belonged. And this time she wasn't going anywhere. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Sonnet 4.5.